We feel very strongly that the whole idea is to buy time for the Smith regime and also to defuse the present armed struggle going on. This is the old trick of Mr. Smith. In 1974, Mr. Smith did succeed in defusing the armed struggle. And now that it was intensified at the beginning of this year, he would like to defuse it once more without settling the basic problem that faces Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is an African country, and naturally it has got to be ruled by the African people who happen to be in the majority.
Do you feel the fighting will go on?
Yes, it will go on, and it should go on. For instance, you take the present arrangement, the defense is to be in the hands of the whites, law and order is to be in the hands of the whites. What happens to our fighters, thousands and thousands of them outside Zimbabwe? We are very, very anxious indeed about their future. According to these proposals, there doesn't seem to be any taking into account what will happen to these thousands and thousands of guerrillas who have committed themselves to the noble idea of liberating their country. It would appear to me they are just left out and anything can happen to them and nobody seems to be interested in their fate. And yet they are the very people who have caused Mr. Smith to change his attitude toward the entire question of Zimbabwe.
So what do you see as the future then of Zimbabwe? A fight to the end until the guerrillas take power?
I'm afraid under the present circumstances, that has to be the course of events.
It is a warm welcome to this special event. As you possibly can tell from my background, it is the official launch of the 3rd edition of the book titled African Nationalism. My name is Ian Mabend. Welcome to this event. We are coming from the Cathedral building in the capital Harare, the religious building in town, possibly you might know the most religious building in town. And today we are talking about the man that is behind me, as you can tell from the banner. That is the late Rev Ndabaningi Sithole. And today we are launching the book that is titled African Nationalism, the 3rd edition. And as you might have known, we have had the first edition published in 1958, and the second edition was also published in 1967. Today, 2022, there is the 3rd edition. The legacy lives on in terms of African nationalism. Talking of the man who was born in 1920, as you might have known, down there in Gazaland, and has rose to become one of the most profound quotes when it comes to African nationalism. The person who many people will refer to when it comes to nationalism, especially African nationalism. Just to give you a quote that he is known for, is that he used to say, "A sense of shock justice has to be removed and justice is restored."
I feel very strongly that the African in Zimbabwe has suffered for the last 86 years. There is nothing to be extreme about when someone demands majority rule now, when someone demands self-determination of the African people. What the whites call moderate leaders is really those African leaders who endorse white supremacy in one form or another.
Distinguished guests, all present, good evening to you all. Thank you for attending this momentous occasion where we, the Ndabaningi Sithole Foundation, are launching the 3rd edition of African Nationalism, a seminal book by the late Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole. Oxford University Press in London, in the United Kingdom, originally published the book in 1959 with a foreword by Sir Garfield Todd, the then Liberal Prime Minister of Southern Rhodesia. In 1968, while Reverend Sithole was in jail, a 2nd edition of the book with an addition of 10 more chapters was published. The book sets out Reverend Sithole's philosophy on African nationalism and its purpose to create a free and independent Africa with a distinct posture of its own, befriending both West and East, but bowing down to neither. An Africa that maintains its own integrity to ensure maximum benefit and satisfaction for its citizens, all in the context of both the negative and positive influences of European civilization on Africa through the colonization that occurred. In the course of this evening, we shall hear views on the book from leading academics and historians, so that all of us present here, and in particular, those who have not read the book, can more aptly appreciate its purpose, value, history, and philosophical entity. The name Rev Ndabaningi Sithole has hitherto been vilified and regarded as anathema by many in our society, particularly the claimants of victory in the liberation struggle and in what is regarded as patriotic history. Public sentiment and academic opinion has increasingly argued over many years that patriotic history has monopolized the liberation struggle with a single narrative of victors that misrepresents certain events and denigrates individual contributions of erstwhile liberation actors with differing views to the victorious ZANU-PF. Needless to say, Sithole has always been silently vindicated and revered by many, and with the 2017 demise of the late President Robert Mugabe's rule, the debate on Ndabaningi and others has re-emerged. The August 2022 unheralded declaration of Ndabaningi Sithole as a national hero by His Excellency President E.D. Mnangagwa has paved the way for a far more comprehensive and complete discussion on Ndabaningi Sithole and many others whose names have been missing from Zimbabwe's official history. Ndabaningi Sithole was the founding president of ZANU in 1963. At the Gweru Party Congress in 1964, Robert Mugabe contested the position of president with the support of a few delegates and lost. Could this have precipitated a controversy between them, which was to haunt them in prison, out of prison, in exile, and in independence, until the death of Sithole on the 12th of December 2000. Today marks the 22nd anniversary of his death, which we celebrate with the launch of the 3rd edition of his seminal work, now with a foreword from His Excellency Raila Odinga, EGH. unknown to many, Ndabaningi Sithole is an uncelebrated, prolific author. In his lifetime, Reverend Sithole published 12 books and wrote numerous articles and booklets. Many of the Reverend's books were written while he was incarcerated for his political views between 1964 and 1975. And other books were penned while he was in exile in the United States of America. African Nationalism was translated into no less than 8 international languages and remains taught in some European universities to this day. In Defense of a Birthright was published in 1975 through the ZANU office in Stockholm, Sweden, and subsequently by the Norman Bethune Institute. The book is a collection of the court records of the re-detention in Salisbury, Rhodesia, of the Reverend Sithole, as well as his legal defense against re-detention. This book is an important historical work that Zimbabweans must access. Letters from Salisbury Prison was published in 1976 and is a collection of letters he smuggled out of prison to fellow colleagues in exile and leaders of foreign governments. The letters are an invaluable record of Zimbabwe's history and record the most turbulent decade in our country's liberation struggle from his unique vantage point. Roots of a Revolution, published in 1977, consists of 11 short stories which highlight the seeds of discontent in the political and social arena in the then Salisbury, Rhodesia. It was written as fiction by the cleric to protect his nationalist comrades, but the stories were drawn from factual events. Those of his contemporary era will recognize the events. In Defense of the Rhodesian Constitutional Agreement was published in 1978 by the Graham Publishing Company, Salisbury, Rhodesia. It is an account of the Rhodesian Constitutional Agreement, which is commonly referred to as the internal settlement, and which ultimately ushered in an independent Zimbabwe. Reverend Sithole lays out his argument of why he supported the internal settlement. Of critical importance, he argues that the nationalist struggle was to achieve the one man, one vote mantra, and that once Ian Smith had accepted it, which he did as part of the internal settlement, the rest was negotiable. It provides the context on a transitional period of Zimbabwe's history from the perspective of one of the nationalists who supported it. Consequently, at the Longest House Conference in 1979, Mugabe and Nkomo negotiated everything else apart from the universal suffrage of one man, one vote, as this had already been agreed. These are some of the books that the Ndabaningi Sithole Foundation intends to prioritize republication of. Earlier, we were introduced to a few more of the books that he authored. In addition, the Sithole family and the foundation have identified other unpublished manuscripts by the late Rev Ndabaningi Sithole, which will eventually be published as part of the work of the foundation. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that despite his vilification by authorities, Sithole remained admired and revered by many. A few of such individuals championed his name in publicly constituting the Ndabaningi Sithole Foundation as far back as 2018 in Zimbabwe. This was at the time when mere association with the name Ndabaningi Sithole was considered a security risk. These determined and brave individuals constitute the founding trustees, who are Makaita Noel Sithole, my apologies. Makaita Noel Mutasa, Senator Sekai Holland, Dr. Esther Chigumira Chura, Jesse Fungai Majome, Dr. Tinashe Mushakavanu, alongside family members Sipikelelo Sithole and Dr. Sifiso Sithole Baro, and Simbai Muchirenga Chizengeni, and myself. The personal memoirs that span his upbringing, life as a student, his entry into nationalist politics, his legal battles, the values that guided him, the vision that inspired him, and the books he wrote gave this small group of people and family the fortitude to tell his story through establishing the foundation. The objectives of the foundation are: 1, to promote the discourse of Zimbabwe's liberation history; 2, to promote reconciliation, unity, and national healing; 3, to promote social and economic development for the prosperity of all in Zimbabwe; and 4thly, to promote the advancement of Pan-Africanism. During the official launch of the Ndabaningi Sithole Foundation in July of 2020, I mentioned that the foundation was established as a vehicle to share Ndabaningi Sithole's legacy with Zimbabweans, Africans, and the world at large, and to promote the legacies of many other unsung heroes. As such, the foundation aims to lead the way for other families, individuals, and institutions to share their stories and articulate their experiences such that collectively we can contribute to filling the missing pages of our history. Since then, the foundation launched Chimvukela TV, a channel on social media that documents and celebrates a wide range of forgotten voices of freedom fighters who are still alive today, many in their sunset years, but have never had an opportunity to share their experiences and perspectives on the liberation struggle. To date, Chimvukela has captured over 15 hours of interviews and expects to capture many more hours with its work. The foundation also wishes to establish an academic research center and library, the Ndabaningi Sithole African Research Center, which shall house the Reverend's published and unpublished works, press coverage cuttings, audio and video recordings that have been identified in global academic institutions and information centers, as well as the archives of other freedom fighters. Another key initiative is to establish local and international scholarships in his name for Zimbabwean citizens seeking to undertake postgraduate studies in African history. Negotiations for partnership with a United Kingdom university are ongoing, as is the search for a partnering local higher tertiary institution. It has been a long and arduous journey to this point, but we realize our journey is just beginning, and we look forward to a bright future, not only for the foundation, but for all the individuals and institutions the foundation will impact. Our most significant drawback is the lack of funding. To date, the foundation has survived on the selfless contributions of family members, trustees, friends, and well-wishers. We are extremely grateful for these benevolent contributions, which have mostly covered the advanced printing of the book, African Nationalism, administration, and the Chimvukela interviews achieved to date. All other services have been voluntary. To go further and realize the aspirations of the foundation, we need significantly more assistance from those who support our cause to further the legacy of Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole and deepen the discourse on the nation's liberation struggle. We need all manner of assistance in terms of office setup costs, office equipment, operational costs, research center costs, project proposals, technical support, book publishing costs, and many other items. With his recent recognition as a national hero, we have noted renewed interest in his name and works, and remain confident that sooner or later, more helping hands will come forward. As such, we hope that we can engage some of you in making our aspirations a reality. The diversity of our gathering this evening, where we have diplomats, corporate leaders, politicians, members of the clergy, academics, the reverends, former students, historians, the media, civil society, family and friends, as well as sympathizers of Rev Ndabaningi Sithole, reflects the dynamic nature of the man whose works we are celebrating today. I wish, however, to make it clear that the foundation remains an independent institution that is apolitical in nature, even though Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole was heavily involved in liberation politics throughout his life. The foundation is not a political movement. Rather, the foundation exists to celebrate the life and legacy of Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole and serve as a platform upon which the shared legacies of other men and women who contributed to the freedom of our country can be celebrated. On behalf of the Ndabaningi Sithole Foundation, I would like to thank His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Comrade E.D. Mnangagwa, for conferring hero status on Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole, which has made our life easy as we can work without fear. And as chairman of the foundation, I would like to express my gratitude to our serving trustees for their contributions in furthering the mandate of the foundation, accepting the risks, and playing a leading role in the republication of African nationalism. I would also like to thank the editors, proofreaders, typesetters, designers, printers, project manager, and all others who contributed to the republication of this book. As the foundation, we are especially grateful to the Right Honorable Raila Odinga AGH for penning the foreword to the book. I would like to pay tribute to the Sithole family, some of whom are here today, for agreeing to establish the foundation, inviting us to be trustees, and for all the support they have given us throughout our journey. Thank you. Finally, I would like to thank all who have supported and continue to support the foundation, be it financially or through ideas or through introductions and recommendations, or just encouraging us to keep moving. We are grateful for the positive impact you continue to have on us, and we look forward to more collaboration with you in the future. Now that the book is out, we now have an important piece of history at our disposal, which will go a long way to reminding and informing the living and the future generations of some of the origins of our shared history, and serve as a foundational pillar to our future. And last but not least, I thank all of you who have spared the time to be with us this evening, and sincerely wish that you continue to associate with the Foundation and that you enjoy the rest of the evening with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to watch 3 clips of a review of the book.
I'm very honored to be here speaking about the African nationalism text, and I'm also very overjoyed that it's back in stock as a 3rd edition. And it makes very important reading for both political theorists, historians, but really for anybody interested in learning about Zimbabwe and Africa and sort of the growth of political thought within those spaces in the modern era. Now, conceived in an era of remarkable uncertainty and hope for the continent, African nationalism belongs to the same cohort of works such as Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, Kwame Nkrumah's Africa Must Unite and Neocolonialism and so forth, right? And other post-colonialist visionaries whose ideas accompanied the African masses into battle against imperialism. A simultaneously triumphant and tragic read, the Reverend's musings in African nationalism are as important now as they were 6 decades ago, even as the nature of said importance continues to evolve, right? The contemporary relevance of the book, I would argue, rests on 4 fundamental contributions to the enduring epistemology on African nationalism. And these 4 contributions are as follows: history, theory, prophecy, and agents. And I'll take you through each one, how I envision them. The first one of these is simple enough, right? Sithole not only succeeds in historicizing the evolutionary road that led to the surge of African nationalism in the post-World War era, his work represents a canonical stamp on the historical moment of uprising. He captures the ideas, texts, and rhetoric that embodied the high point of nationalism. So that is to say, this book is both historic, right, and historical. Historical in that it tells the history, but historic because it time steps. Think about this. This is in the 1950s when this book first comes out. We're only a few years removed from the Second World War. We are still pre the rise of ZANU and ZAPU and so forth. So this is a very pivotal moment that the Reverend inserts himself and asserts himself in Zimbabwean history in particular, but African history in general, and post-colonial history, anti-colonial history, I mean. The second contribution is closely linked to the first. In addition to telling the story of how we got into the era of African nationalism and the era itself, Sithole presents us with a working definition of nationalism in colonial Africa and lays out various considerations through which we are supposed to theorize the idea and reality thereof. One of my favorite parts of the book is when he's talking about how Pan-Africanism and nationalism, which other people have posed as being fundamental opposites, he talks about them as being 2 sides of the same coin, right? And I like how he theorizes that. Now, while the first 2 contributions, the history and the theory, are staples of the nationalistic canon, the last 2 are what distinguish African nationalism. 6 decades after its publication and 4 since the advent of independence, the book continues to present the reader with critical questions pertaining to the conceptualization of the contemporary African nation. Should the continent seek to retain relations and model its rule after Western capitalist democracies, or venture out east? Maybe even consider like pre-colonial forms of governance? Can true Pan-Africanism and localized nationalism coexist? If the ontology of African nationalism is inherently rooted in its opposition to European colonialism, what then is the African nation in the post-colonial era? Is it just a reaction to Europe, right, to external forces? It's a very important question. In fact, I also love the part when he talks about moving away from a Eurocracy to an Afrocracy, right? But that still begs the question that if you're basing your nation on moving away from something, doesn't that something still control how you move, right? These are very important questions. These are but some of the pressing questions that Sithole, whether by design or by default, puts before the contemporary reader now, as it did in 1959 when the first edition came out, and 1967 when the second edition came out. Finally, there is the matter of agency. The 21st century reader will inevitably look to read beyond the history and ideas put forth by yesteryear thinkers. They want to know who the man or woman who theorized African nationalism was and what experiences and environment shaped their worldview. In not only beginning the book, right, with a detailed autobiography, but also injecting his experiences into his interrogations in later sections, Sithole allows us critical insight into how African nationalism, the book, conceptually came to be relative to his positionality. Ndabaningi Sithole's ideas are as relevant now as they have ever been. While revisionist scholars may look to posit him as a relic of a bygone era, I believe his ideas remain an important window into the historic rise of African nationalism and a platform upon which contemporary debates thereof can be held. So, again, I'm in love with this book. It's a book that I assign to all my upper level and graduate students. It's a book that I read every other year just to, again, as part of a canon that features other amazing African history. And indeed, the Reverend has earned his rightful place within that library. Yeah, you know, it's an amazing book, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts on it.
What is important is what we discuss together as delegations from Zimbabwe. That includes African delegations as well as the white delegation. It is not what Smith wants us to do that matters, but what matters is what we as delegations of Zimbabwe agree upon. And Mr. Smith does not seem to like that, and therefore I cannot see Mr. Smith suggesting to the conference anything which is not acceptable to him. And we cannot accept any plan which does not give us immediately majority rule.
Thank you for the opportunity to reflect upon African nationalism. This is a book that has had a huge impact on me since I first encountered it as a student in Canada. This book was written in the 1950s to inform people who did not know Africa well or who did not understand the nationalist cause. Hence the autobiographical mode and the personal voice that speaks so powerfully through the text. But now it also serves as a reminder to current generations so that we can all better understand the experiences and thought of early nationalists. I've used this book in teaching over the years because it communicates so effectively with such a wide audience. But today I'd like to speak about two other reasons that it's important, drawing on my own research on nationalism in Zimbabwe. This book documents and informs us about many who contributed to the struggle for independence, but who are not commemorated publicly nor written about. I don't mean just Ndabaningi Sithole, but all those he writes and talks about in the book. It is rich with vignettes and anecdotes. He challenges assumptions about ethnicity, about the contribution of women, churches, traditional authorities. Many of these people have been almost ignored in Zimbabwean history, and certainly not commemorated publicly. For decades after independence, there were few schools, roads, civic buildings, and so forth named after Zimbabwean nationalists. And even now, the list remains quite narrow and restricted. In fact, I would argue that public history has been sidelined, written out, or narrowly defined. This book is a countervailing force, emphasizing the richness and diversity of experiences. The book also helps us understand contemporary politics. Nationalism is not just a belief or an idea. Rather, Ndabaningi Sithole reveals how complicated it is. Nationalism in Zimbabwe is revealed as a way of organizing, a way of doing politics, which continues to shape contemporary practice. It brought together a diverse range of interests and peoples, and that had an impact on the course of nationalism and its legacy. As Masipula Sithole, the younger brother of Ndabaningi, put it, we pursued a winner-takes-all strategy, which led to politics being, in his words, zero-sum. And of course, Ndabaningi discovered that personally to his own cost. Together, the two Sithole's writings help us to better understand the political system that has emerged. This is a crucial contribution to Zimbabwe's civic sphere by true intellectuals, grounded in their origins, but speaking to us all. Thank you.
I hope after we have studied thoroughly the Anglo-American proposals, we would like to put forward our views publicly, what we feel should be done, and would invite Mr. Smith and others to an open discussion of the matter. I must say, we do not see any reason for this internal settlement, when actually every one of us, the Rhodesian Front, the Patriotic Front, the frontline states, South Africa, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the UANC have participated in the consultative exercise that has been carried on by the Anglo-American team. We therefore doubt very much the good intentions of the idea of an internal settlement, because even the Anglo-American proposals themselves are based on what the people of this country have accepted and have put forward. And this is why we lay more importance on the Anglo-American proposals, particularly that they have at long last accepted the principle of one man, one vote.
My name is Tinashe Mushakavano, and I'm a scholar of literature and history. I first encountered Ndabaningi Sithole, the writer, when I was an undergraduate student. I was fascinated with ways he combined elements of historiography and memoir in exploring the experience and legacy of colonialism. In his writings, he was invested in how Black people conceived, imagined, described, and engaged the world in which they are situated. It is these explorations that earned him respect among his peers and led to his elevation in the fledgling African nationalist movement of the 1950s. The publication of African Nationalism in 1959 was an important historical event. This is a book that combines autobiography and polemics to articulate the condition of Black people in the colonial context of Rhodesia. Sithole was perhaps the first Black writer in Rhodesia to give expression to the philosophy underlying the nationalist struggle. More than that, it presented the humanity and dignity of the Black Africans. This is what made the book not only popular locally and continentally, but also led to it subsequently being translated into almost a dozen languages. African nationalism is an important historical document of the liberation struggle, written in real time, in the moment. It is also a book that connects our struggles with the African diaspora. That sojourn to America was for Sithole an awakening. It made him see himself clearly and the destiny of his people. It is also a book that gives language to an urgent political quest that was spreading across the continent. To know and understand Sithole, therefore, is to know and understand African nationalism, the history and origin of Zimbabwe's Second Chimurenga War, the stubborn African struggle for land, freedom, and dignity, and the relentless African resistance against white supremacy. Sithole's ideas are foundational to the Zimbabwean project and its notions of freedom. I congratulate the Ndabaningi Sithole Foundation for bringing back this book to life so that a new generation of readers can learn about our country's past. I hope too that the foundation will continue to create the necessary infrastructures to share the incredible materials they hold with the world. Thank you.
Most of what I had written has already been said by Bishop, so I will have to skip a few of my pages. I would like also to extend our gratitude to His Excellency, Dr. Emerson Mnangagwa, for taking his time to also review this book. I understand he has done that, and we really valued his input. Thank you. I think I have come to the end of my thank you, so I will just say siyabonga kakhulu, tinotenda, kelebohile, asante sana, taksomike, obrigada, and so forth. Thank you so much.
There you have it, Zimbabwe, the official launch of this book that I'm holding, which is called African Nationalism by the late Rev Ndabaningi Sithole. This is the third edition, officially launched today here at the cathedral in the capital, Harare, Zimbabwe. And we have heard so many people talking about the passion that Rev Ndabaningi Sithole had in terms of making people understand what is it about when it comes to nationalism and how Africans should ensure that freedom stays with them forever and no one else will ever try and snatch it from the Africans. And now, to understand more about the man that we're talking about, that is Reverend Dr. That is Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole. We want to understand more about the man that he was. I'm joined by Bishop Gandia to find more about. Bishop, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm doing fine.
Can you start by explaining to us the man we are talking about today, the man we are celebrating, the teacher who was also a reverend? Where does politics, religion mix? How do the two work together?
You know, the two are very closely linked. One comes out of the other. For us in the church, you know, concern for the human being is fundamental. We believe that God created all people equal, and we have to ensure that there is equality amongst all people, regardless of race, regardless of tribe, regardless of any of the things that divide us.
And now looking at the man we are talking about today, that is Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole. What sort of man was he in terms of nationalism and ensuring that Zimbabweans do find pride in themselves and fighting for freedom?
You know, he ignited African nationalism amongst many, many Zimbabweans. I was just a little boy then in the 60s. And wherever he went, whenever we heard about him, you know, it kind of, you know, raised emotions, deep feelings about your own country and what should be done. He was that kind of a man for us. When he spoke, you felt you had to do something. He was that kind of a man who was also very gentle, and you could not help but associate with him. You could not help but listen to his wisdom, the wisdom that came out of his mouth. That was the kind of man he was.
And looking at his legacy now that we are still having literature being released that he wrote back then and still being relevant, what role do you think these books will play in building the nation going forward in Zimbabwe becoming an upper middle income society?
The book contributes immensely to our life here in Zimbabwe. Understanding where we came from, the whole history of our own, or part of the history of our own liberation struggle, the relationships. It also contributes to the academic sector. As you heard earlier on this evening, that this book is being used as a set textbook in many universities, both in the United Kingdom and in the USA. And I think locally it contributes to the education of our own young men and women on African nationalism. We need to know where we came from, what happened, and what can be done. This is essential for us.
As we continue to understand more about this book, now I'm joined by Dr. Esther Chigumira to find out more about the particular book we are talking about and the men we are celebrating today. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Can you start by explaining the significance of having literature written by our own African nationalists? What role does it play in building the country going forward?
So for me, it's not about what role it plays. For me, it's about Africans writing about Africa and about our own country. I come from an academic background, and one of my hearts is to see more African leaders writing about their stories, the stories that can shape our students today, the stories that can shape my 6-year-old, my 9-year-old, and this is what this book is about. And it's about, for me, I don't know how to put it, but I was in a church, and the pastor said to me, one thing that struck me at the core, and which is probably why I when I was asked to join the Sithole Foundation, he said to me, well, to the congregation, that one of the things he struggles with is when Africans, we don't read, we don't write. And what Ndabaningi Sithole was saying to us is, right, you need to read. And he says, you know, someone said to me that if you want to hide a secret from an African, put it in a book. That shaped me. It shaped the trajectory that I took as an academic. It shaped the trajectory that I took with my own children. And I think that's what I'm saying, that it's not about a role in Zimbabwe, but it's about a mindset. And if you heard what the reviewers were saying, it's about the theory, it's about the journey, right? And it's about, for me, our children now. Our children need to read. Our children need to write. Our own parents need to write their story, because the story of the African has to be heard. The story of our own personal struggles has to be heard. That's what the book is about for me as a member, as an academic.
Rev Sithole, you've said already that you have grave doubts whether any constitutional conference can work. What did you mean?
Well, I mean this. There are two polarized positions at present. The white government in this country would like to maintain a minority rule. On the other hand, you have the African population, which is committed to the proposition of majority rule now.
You mean now? I mean, you just don't mean the principle accepted, but the implementation of majority rule.
I mean the implementation of majority rule now. The problem of minority is now, therefore its solution has to be now and not in the future.
But you can't expect Mr. Smith to attend a conference and agree to give you majority rule now.
Well, I do expect him to attend so that he will put forward his views, and we will put forward our views, so that as the two views conflict, probably something will come out. But it must be something that is in the nature of majority rule now.
But is there no way of compromising? I mean, can you not step back some way and accept majority rule in, say, 5 or 6 years' time?
The problem is now. The solution has to be now.
And now we are also joined by Comrade Margaret Dongo to also understand, a relationship, reading, and also, understanding of African nationalism, given the men we are talking about. Comrade Dongo, thank you so much for coming through and joining us. Talk to me about the men that we are celebrating today, Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole.
The man that we are celebrating today is a very important man historically. And I'm happy to say and also realize that history will never die. You see, it will always come true one day. And I want to thank His Excellency Idi for actually realizing that he deserved to be a national hero. And he has always been a national hero. Don't forget, he was the first president after the Guero Conference, but always African politics. You know, the moment you actually contest and then you lose, and the way you are taken in the future is that you're always a contender. And I think we learn a lot from Ndabaningi Sithole. We need a unit of purpose. He has done a lot of things that probably Zimbabweans don't know. You know, when he came from America, I remember was a member of parliament and ZANU-PF that time. He actually said at the airport, he talked about the resettlement scheme. He's the one who introduced it to talk about that. And he did it practically at Churu Farm. But it didn't augur well with us anyway. I was part of ZANU-PF. But I'm saying, as part of history, the young generation have to learn without fear. Because there's always fear of unknown and fear of known. Even within our young generation, this is why they are not learning the true history of these gallant fighters. Ndabaningi was a true national leader. He was a nationalist. And there's a lot that the young upcoming generation should learn from him.
The problems facing the ANC have been all resolved. We have had our differences. For instance, ZANU has had a different approach to the problem facing us, and ZAPU has had a different approach, and in the same way, the ANC, that is the old ANC, has had also a different approach. So that there have been at least 3 different approaches, but we are working hard toward unifying our approaches so that we have one approach to the problem that faces us.
Why do you think the ceasefire, the negotiated ceasefire with nationalist guerrillas, is not working?
It is not working because the government has not followed what it agreed to follow after the Lusaka agreement had been made. For instance, the government had agreed that it would release all political detainees and all political prisoners and things like that. But up to now, it has not done so. And moreover, the military presence of South African troops in Rhodesia militates against any idea whatsoever of a ceasefire. The government has gone out of its way to give orders to the African guerrillas to stop fighting, and the African guerrillas have been infuriated by this act. So that because of that act on the part of the government, they have intensified their actions to demonstrate that they are not acting under the orders of the Rhodesian government.
So with me is Senator Sekai Holland, who is also a veteran politician, and we want to find out his understanding of this book of nationalism as we speak today. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. Can you explain to us the significance of having African literature being written by African leaders?
The importance of Rev Ndabaningi Sithole is that internationally he is an icon in academia. And people have always been very surprised why Zimbabweans were so incredibly ignorant that no one really put his work forward. So the launch today for us is something we planned a long time ago, but it has now got a bounce because His Excellency, the President Emmerson Mnangagwa, declared Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole a national hero. What I want to say is, internationally, he stands among all the greats of literature from the 50s, and his writing has endured to this day. So hopefully, young people reading that book will get a different understanding of our history, our talent, and that there will be a seismic shift towards people working together, because what the president did was a healing gesture for all Zimbabweans.
We, the people of this country, must come to terms with one another in a genuine way, and Britain is quite prepared as the colonial power to respect the terms of our agreement on certain conditions. I have had the pleasure of discussing matters with Dr. Owen, the Secretary of State for Commonwealth and Foreign Affairs. I have also had the satisfaction of discussing the same thing with Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, the leader of the Conservative Party. And I have also had the same privilege of discussing the same thing with Mr. Jeremy Thorpe and other liberals. One thing in common between all of them is that they all support the present internal settlement talks as a step in the right direction, and that if we can come out with a genuine settlement, they will no doubt support it in every possible way.
There you have it, Zimbabwe, the official launch of the 3rd edition of the book that is titled African Nationalism by the late Reverend Ndabaningi Sithole.